Welcome back to Debating Metal. I'm your host, Kenneth Dean, the Dean of Metal, along with my co-host, Chris K. This is a show where we talk about all things hard rock and heavy metal, and this week we're heading back to the 80s LA scene and going head-to-head with W.A.S.P's self-titled debut versus the sophomore release, The Last Command.
These are W.A.S.P's two first albums that made them one of the most talked about metal bands of the mid-80s. We're going to debate the merits of both, and at the end we'll decide which album is better. Last episode we debated Rob Halford's two solo bands, Fight and Halford's debut albums. So if you missed that debate, make sure to download it and click subscribe so you don't miss another episode.
All right, before we get to our main topic today, I have some Rusty Metal I want to talk about. This week's Rusty Metal, and we haven't done Rusty Metal in a while because really hasn't been the need for it because we've talked about so many old things. But even this time, what we're talking about today is old, but it brings up a certain era, and we're talking about the LA metal scene from the early 80s. And this album is celebrating its 40th anniversary. It just passed a week or so ago, maybe 2 weeks ago. It is Motley Crue's Too Fast for Love, their 1981 debut album, which they produced themselves. It was recorded at the Hit City West Studios in Los Angeles, California, and it was released on their own Leather Records label, which was owned by them and their manager, Alan Kaufman. All right, so this album is kind of different in a couple ways. The original, released on Leather Records, has a certain sound to it. And then it was remixed when the band signed to Elektra Records, and it came out a year later or so, or a little bit less than a year later. It has a completely different sound, a lot more bottom end to it, which is good because the song, the mixes kind of needed it. But at the same time, I like the Leather Record mixes. They're obviously very different. There's some things that are not on the Elektra version that are on the Leather version, and vice versa. What I like about the Leather Records version is that it has those things like the intro to Too Fast for Love, or the extra, the background, I guess, of the guys in the back of at the end of Livewire, or is it Piece of Your Action? Yeah, no, it's Livewire. So there's lots of little nuances that are on the Leather Records versions that are not on the Elektra version. And most people out there are familiar with the Elektra version just because that's what's readily available. I have both because a few years ago, Motley Crue on Motley Crue Records, or Motley Records, released an official reissue of the Leather Records version on vinyl with the original album cover and all that stuff. So it's really cool. I bought it. It sits in my collection right next to the Elektra version. For those people who don't know or not familiar, the first album has some really cool songs on it, like Take Me to the Top, Piece of Your Action, the title track Too Fast for Love, as well as their concert staple Livewire. So for those people out there who are not familiar with the first album, or not into Motley Crue, or whatever it is that you want, I would still give this album a listen to because it's really, really cool. It sounds so different from the stuff that's on Shout at the Devil. Sounds so different from the stuff that's on Dr. Feelgood. Chris, you and I talk about this all the time, how Vince Neil's voice is different from album to album to album.
Yeah, definitely.
So this one, I think, is probably his second whiniest sounding voice that he's had out there. Because like he was so angry on Shout at the Devil. I love the voice that he uses on Shout at the Devil. And then his voice is a little more mature, but yet still high pitched on what is it? Theater of Pain. I think he gets a little whiny on Dr. Feelgood, and Girls, Girls, Girls is pretty different too. It's more kind of, I don't want to say yelling, but it's I guess a little smoother, but still a little lower pitched.
Vince is one of those guys that he's a better frontman than a singer. He's never been a great singer live. He's never been a great singer in general, but he fits the metal vibe, and that's all that was really, like, he could stay in tune and everything. I'm not saying he's a bad singer, but like compare him to some of the really truly great singers of the genre, and there's no comparison, So he's one of those guys that it is very interesting. He does sound really different on every album, but I do like his vocals on this album. I like Too Fast for Love in general because it is so kind of raw and new.
Exactly, and that's part of. It was such a kind of different style. I mean, obviously, if you were in the LA scene at that time, you were familiar with the songs, but when it hit, when it hit the national scene, and obviously that was with the Electra version, it was definitely different, and it caught a lot of people's attention.
Yeah.
Well, a couple notes about the album. The Electra version was remixed by Michael Wagner, who is of Dawkins, Saigon Kick, Extreme, Skid Row, White Lion, and all those 80 metals albums, or all those 80s metal bands fame. He even mixed, he was the mixer on Master of Puppets. So, for Metallica. So that tells you he ran the gamut. I mean, he is pretty good, or he was pretty good, because I think he's retired now, at what he did in the 80s. So, produced and mixed a lot of these 80s metal bands. And oddly enough, when Michael Wagner did this, he wasn't super famous yet. He wasn't the top producer of the time. He actually did this mix under the supervision of Roy Thomas Baker, who was a very famous producer at the time. So that's an interesting note about this album. So, like I said, if you have a chance, give it a listen. I think it's a great album, pretty much front to back. It's got some really interesting songs on it. They're not all one style. It does definitely run the gamut in terms of 80s metal styles out there. Like Livewire is so hard and so metal. And then you got a song like Starry Eyes, which is so melodic and softish, kind of.
Yeah.
So, and Too Fast for Love it's got this killer riff on it. And so there's so much to enjoy about this album. Give it a shot. I think you guys enjoy it again if you listen to it. All right, and I know you said, Chris, that you don't have a pick of the week, and I can understand why, because right now the music that's coming out there is not that great.
I mean, there's some good stuff that's coming out that's just not my style. So it's hard for me to sit there and promote and say, yeah, listen to this when it's not something that I am really truly into. So I'd rather not have a pick of the week if I'm not going to be able to fully support something.
Exactly. So we're not going to talk about anything we don't want to support. All right.
It just comes off as insincere. So
yeah, exactly. So let's get to the main topic tonight, and that is W.A.S.P's first album, the self-titled album W.A.S.P, versus the second album, The Last Command. W.A.S.P's first album was released on August 17th, 1984. It was produced by Mike Varney of Shrapnel Records fame. Many of you who are out there who know about guitar albums and stuff like that know Mike Varney as the owner and producer of many great, guitar albums from people like Blues Saraceno, John Christ, his solo album. A lot of those albums came out on Shrapnel Records. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Cacophony's first album with Jason Becker and Marty Friedman came out on Shrapnel.
Yeah, he does like Yngwie Malmsteen, Racer X, Paul Gilbert.
All those,
John
all
Five.
those kinds of. Yeah, he's totally into those guitar players, and he gave them an avenue to release their music. So that was pretty cool. So that was what Shrapnel was all about. But this album was released on Capitol Records, and it was recorded at the record plant in Los Angeles, California. The band on this album, or actually the band on these two albums, pretty much stays the same, except for the fact that
Tony Richards was replaced.
Tony Richards is the first drummer, and Stephen Riley is the drummer on The Last Command. That's the only difference. Otherwise, it's Blackie Lawless on vocals and bass, Chris Holmes on lead and rhythm guitars, and Randy Piper on lead and rhythm guitars. So that's the band in a nutshell. Chris, go ahead and start up with W.A.S.P's first album.
I have to say before we start that W.A.S.P's is really hard to say. But yeah, the album starts off with I Want to Be Somebody. It's a great start to the album with a slamming drum intro. It starts the album off with high energy and exemplifies what early W.A.S.P was all about. The chorus is recognizable. The lyrics are rebellious and angry, just as Blackie's vocals are. The solo is one of the most memorable of W.A.S.P's. But this really shouldn't have been the intro track. And they kind of rectified that when they re-released the album. The original intro was supposed to be Fuck Like a Beast, but it was cut from the album due to the controversy at the time, being one of the Filthy 15, and stores probably weren't going to carry it at that time with that track on there.
No, that track is a conversation all by itself.
Very true.
I Want to Be Somebody. I really like that song. I Want to Be Somebody. Basically, there's no build up in this song. It's 3 seconds in, boom, you hit the lyrics, and Blackie's just yelling at you right away. I like the whole call and response part with the song. The chorus is catchy and it's got the gang vocals, and I Want to Be Somebody just chanted. It's so cool. I mean, that is definitely all about youth, all about rebellion. In fact, even though it wasn't supposed to start the album, I actually think it's a pretty good way to start it, because it's basically just like, boom, kick your ass as soon as you go in. I mean, 3 seconds in, it's already, Blackie's already yelling at you. So I don't have a problem with this being the first song, although knowing the song Animal as well as I do, that's not a bad intro either, because that's just a slap you in the face kind of song as well.
Yeah, I mean, either way, it's a good intro. To be honest, I don't have a preference, because I like both versions of it. I mean, at this point, I've probably listened to the re-release more, so I kind of in my head think of that as the proper track listing, but I know in the back of my head that this is the original release. I mean, it's not much different. You're adding a track to the beginning and a track to the end, essentially, and then a bonus track. So, not a whole lot of difference. Track 2 is Love Machine, or Love Machine. This was the first W.A.S.P song that I can remember ever hearing. And I kind of really dug the sound. Like, when I remember hearing this track and thinking, like, I need to hear more of this band. I loved the drumming style, as well as like its place in the mix. That's one thing I really like about this album, is that the drums are kind of pushed to the front. The bass and the guitars at the beginning kind of create this mood. Like there's an early melody that you can hear the bass very clearly, and you can hear the guitars, and then it turns into the main melody of the song, and that's one of the parts that I can really remember. And then I love the LOVE back and forth with the drum beat between, almost same kind of as like a call and response, but with the drum. It's a really cool thing, and it's not the best solo of the album, but it really fits the song.
Yeah, I mean, that's the one thing that this album kind of deals with. The guitar playing, riff-wise, throughout the album, everything's great. I believe there's a lot of growing pains, per se, as far as guitar solos are concerned. There's even though they're all very melodic, and I think that has a lot to do with that they weren't the most proficient guitar players as far as solos were concerned, so they came up with really good melodic solos that were able to enhance a song. And that was really special about this album, because that's a trait that they have, but because they don't shred. Neither Randy nor Chris are shredders.
No, I mean, they're both more bluesy guitar players, to be honest.
Exactly. And one thing I noticed about it, and I don't know if it's Chris or Randy or both, but they know how to make these guitars squeal. and not squealing like a pinch harmonic kind of squeal. There's just part of the way that it's recorded, part of the way that the notes that they're hitting. It just kind of has like a very metallic squealing kind of squelch noise.
There's a distinct distortion sound.
Yeah, their tone is very distinct on this, and I like it. So that's the one thing about most of the solos on this album are like that, and they really, really, really do enhance the songs. So speaking of this particular song, it definitely is one of those that enhances the song. I agree with you. I love the call and response part with the chorus and the drums and the gang vocals and all that. I like how the guitars essentially are quiet in the first half of the verse, and then when he comes in for the second half, they're hitting open chords basically, and heading into the chorus. So this song to me oozes hooks. I mean, there's hooks all over the song. This song has a lot of space to breathe, which if everyone who's listening knows, I love songs that breathe. So this is a really, really cool song. One of the first songs I heard from W.A.S.P, along with I Want to Be Somebody. I don't even think I had heard Animal until years later. I had heard about it, but I hadn't heard the song until I picked up the 12-inch vinyl. I got a gold picture disc back from the day, and it was an import. And I was like, ooh, I got to get my hands on this before it gets banned again,
Yeah.
So, but yeah, and the drums, I love the drums on this song. I mean, it's very tribal-like, but if you listen really carefully, think about this. This is 1984, right? There's a lot of double bass on this song, and it's consistent, and it's not like double bass like Overkill from Motorhead, but it's very rhythmic in that it changes, and it almost kind of has an ebb and flow to the double bass, which is, to me, I would consider a precursor to a lot of the stuff, even though the speed is different and the tone is different, a precursor to a lot of the stuff that ended up becoming melodic death metal, or even some of the new wave of American heavy metal, which is mostly, what's the metal that you don't like?
Metalcore.
Oh yeah, metalcore. So it's a precursor to that all the way back in 1984. So I think that's a really cool thing if you listen carefully. And Tony Richards, I've never heard from him again. I don't know what band he ever played with again, but he was really good on this first album. So
there's a story to that too. So Blackie was heavily involved with the production of the drums, forcing it. Really, and I wanted to talk about this mostly later, but he was very, what's the word? Micromanaging of the drums. They tried recording it about 10, 15 different ways. He really drove the engineers insane. At one point, he didn't want any echo, any extra sound, so he was having Tony record one note at a time. And then they were going to just splice it all together. He had him record just little sections and then splice it together. And there was just so many things that really shouldn't happen in a production. It's pretty interesting to listen to hear the people that were all involved with it, and they all have the same stories to tell about how this went down. And I can't imagine, like, with that much overbearing mentality behind it, that you would have a good time even recording this album. It amazes me how this all came together and sounds so good as it does when there was just such a overbearing mentality just driving everything. So it's really interesting to kind of hear, and if you get the chance, like, check out, there are some interviews with Tony Richards out there. He did have a drug problem, and that kind of facilitated him leaving. They felt like he couldn't keep up with the performances, which is something that tends to happen when you're on drugs. And he's very forthright about some of that stuff too. But at the same time, he also is very honest about how Blackie was during the production, and I think we all kind of know from multiple people how that's true.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I want to talk about that when we get to the end of this whole thing, about Chris Holmes and Blackie's relationship. One of the things I wanted to mention about this song specifically is on the reissued version. You kind of referenced it earlier when you were talking about the reissue that included Animal. This song, I don't know if it's a full blown remix or if they just took the mix that they had. Like went back in the studio, put everything back the way to the exact mix, and then replaced the vocal track with an alternate vocal track, because there is a line towards the beginning of the song that is said and done completely different than the original release. And in fact, I kind of like it better.
So there's another aspect to that too. Blackie recorded the same vocal line about 20 times, sometimes more. So it's very possible he just took, a line that was recorded from earlier and just switched it out. He went through the tracks again and said, I like this one better, and then switched it out. So there's a distinct possibility that that's the case, rather than actually re-recording it later on or something like that.
I don't necessarily think it was re-recorded later on so much as, like I said, it's an alternate vocal track. Like what you're saying. It's just, it's very different. And not in terms of sound, it's just a different way of delivering the line. And I thought it was really cool, actually, and it's funny because now when I hear the song, I'm looking for the alternate line because of how much cooler I think it is. And listening to the original, I'm like, oh yeah, this is the original, so I think it's something to take note for those people who have both the original version and the reissued CD.
To be honest, I have no problem with artists trying to achieve some type of perfection. There is something to be said, though, like when we go back and listen to some of these albums or watch movies, etc., where you want to see it how you saw it the first time, or you want to hear it how you heard it the first time. I mean, I know we've heard it with Megadeth, where he's re-recorded sometimes out of necessity, like with these boots. He's had to re-record it because of the lyrics, but I think we all as fans want sometimes to hear that original version, but occasionally there are improvements that are made where it's like, yeah, this is better. I like this version. So I think that's definitely one case where I actually do like the remix of this album a little more than the original release.
Fair enough.
All right, so that takes us to track 3, The Flame. It's a little slower pace, but not by much. This is very reminiscent of Kiss to me. I could definitely hear Paul Stanley belting out this one. The chorus is not bad. The riff that follows the guitar solo could really be like a Motley Crue riff. It's interesting. There's aspects of this song that make me think like this is kind of a bastard child of Kiss and Motley Crue.
I can see where you're pointing out with that, and I think the reason that is because the song is based on old school blues. That's the way it is. So when they kind of took those old school blues and turned it into hard rock and heavy metal songs, these are the kinds of song structures that they had. And one thing I note about this particular song, The Flame, is that this song is pretty much the style in which most W.A.S.P songs are written.
Yeah, definitely.
So, like, if you hear this song, you can pretty much hear this song on every W.A.S.P album, and obviously not the same exact song, but different lyrics,
pretty
different
close
structure. but it's a very similar style that Blackie writes in, and this particular song has that style, and it's prevalent throughout the entire career of W.A.S.P. Again, another simple melodic guitar solo, which is you can tell at this point that these guys are not shredders, but what makes that so much better is because they don't shred, that their accomplished guitar players because they can take a solo and turn it into something melodic, something that goes with the song, something that flows with the song, rather than just being given 16 bars and rip as many notes as possible. I mean, there's a lot of emotion for the most part behind these songs, or behind these solos. So that's one thing I think it's cool about almost every solo on this album.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, but some of the tracks I think have somewhat lacking solos. But I'll go into that when we get to them. But overall, I think it's really good. There was room for improvement because they were a young band.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, don't get me wrong. The solos are what's the word I want to use? The solos are a result of the fact that they're not the best guitar players in the world, and that they're still young and that they're still learning.
I don't think you have to be the best guitar player in the world to put out great solos either.
I don't think so either.
I think it's one of those things that there's always that argument of, you've got a guy, say like Steve Vai, and he's a proficient, fantastic guitarist, but you compare him to somebody like B.B. King. B.B. King's not hitting all the same notes every time because he can't. He wasn't a proficient guitar player in that way. He just played with whatever came out of his soul. So
exactly.
There's always that argument of, which is better, and I don't think there is a better. I think it's just a preference thing.
Right, exactly.
That takes us to track 4, which is Bad. This is Michael Jackson at his absolute best. It's not a bad track. It's definitely not the best bad song out there, it's kind of a trend from the late 80s. Overall, it's a little bit generic. It's another one of those, like you mentioned, where like W.A.S.P has a certain style, a certain song structure, and there's always, on every album, there's always a few tracks that just kind of hit that same structure to it, same vibe. Probably the most memorable part is the drum track, honestly. It sounds really good, and it's mixed really well here. It does have a pretty good solo, although on this particular track, this is one I wanted to mention where it's really buried in the mix, and it sounds very echoey, whereas some of the others don't. Like this, I thought this was like it's a better solo than the production allowed it to be.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And I had my notes said it says another my notes say it's another simple melodic solo. But yes, I do agree with you that it's way back in the mix. There's a lot of echo, and it's a lot of definitely buried in that regards.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because I think it's like I said, a better solo than what the mix allowed it to be. It just something about kind of sticking it far in the background. It just didn't make sense.
Right. And for me, I like this song. I think this song is pretty cool. What I really like about this song, it's a slower song. It's still very melodic. And it's not a slower song in terms of like a ballad sense, but it's got a lot of groove to it.
Yeah.
To me, this song grooves, and that's what makes the song for me better than some others. But it's
definitely not on the worst end of the spectrum on the album, but it's not like it's in the middle to me, upper middle, I would say.
Yeah, and I like the chanty part because when they say bad, it's not just saying bad to be bad, but they're shouting the letters B, A, D, E. And
I like the chorus. Yeah, I don't like the part that follows it as much, but I like the chorus itself. Cool. It's got a cool, bad. That it's cool.
Yeah.
All right. So that leads us to track 5, which is School Days. It starts off with the Pledge of Allegiance. Now, I don't have kids. Do kids still say the Pledge of Allegiance in school? Or I know it's an altered version or something.
In 1984, they did.
Well, I know that, but now I'm just curious now. Like,
I don't. Actually, that's not true. I've been in my daughter's classes. I think the last time was 2 years ago, before the pandemic. They say the Pledge of Allegiance, and then they say the Pledge of Allegiance of Texas.
so they still do that too.
Yeah,
Okay.
they still do that.
Okay.
And they
I was
have
just curious. I know things have changed in the last.
they have a kid say it over the microphone, and everybody has to, or over the intercom.
Okay, gotcha.
So yeah, they still do that.
So to me, this reminds me a lot of Alice Cooper's Schools Out for Summer, but like not as good. You know, it's the solo is like non-existent. It starts off so well. Like it reminds me even of like a George Lynch solo at the beginning. It's got some soul. It sounds really nice, and then it just like stops 3 seconds later. I'm like, why? Why'd you give me solo blue balls? You know, like it's not a bad track. It's just for me, like you started off with I Want to Be Somebody, Love Machine, even The Flame, and then you're kind of getting to the middle, like, and now we're gonna take off again after this. But this track to me almost sounds like I'm waiting for the next song.
Wow, I kind of like this song. I mean, it has that intro with the Pledge of Allegiance, and then it comes in with a killer riff, and it goes right into this melodic verse. But, you know, I mean, I can see where you're coming from as far as that's concerned, because it's that chanty kind of chorus, school days and stuff like that, you know, school days, and then he has this little thing that he says about it, and then it goes back into
It's a
school
little
days.
bit of a product of its time. You know, like,
Yes, definitely.
obviously the whole album is very 80s sounding, but there are some that songs are a little bit more timeless than others, where this one definitely feels like it's mid-80s.
Yeah, and the cool thing about the two things I like about this song is it's kind of interesting. So right before the solo, there's a breakdown part. Blackie actually sings his own version of his own kind of Pledge of Allegiance to something, and then it goes into almost like the song almost just stops. You know, it comes to like a crawl, and the solo comes in, and it's just a couple of notes, and then it
Literally.
then immediately starts to pick up the pace, and then goes into the chorus again. So that's an interesting little breakdown right there for the guitar solo. But the one thing that I really, really like about this song, and I think this is one of the things I like about, you know, my history as being someone who wanted to be a producer, and I look for certain things like this. There's a line where Blackie says, "A fire bell is ringing hell," and Tony starts banging away at a triangle that makes it sound like it's an alarm bell, and I really think that's a really cool touch on that song when he says that, because it does sound like someone pulled the alarm, and and the bell's going off. So I think
that was it's cheesy, but it's cool. It's very 80s cheesy.
There's a lot of songs, and I but to me it's a nuance. I like that in certain songs, if you make a reference to something, I get
it.
I'm trying to think who does a song like that. It's also another 80s song. Zaxxon during their song Denim and Leather, right? When you were a kid, when you learn to play the bass, and the bass guy hits you, he hits it like this cool little bass line, or did you want to play the drums, and the guy starts pounding on the drums. I mean, things like that are really cool, and those are the things that fans enjoy. Because it's
a live touch,
it's exactly.
It's kind of fun live.
Yeah. So I think the song is okay. I mean, it's not the best song. I like other songs better than this, and I see where you're coming from with that. But there's some touches throughout the song that make it pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, that leads us into a really kick-ass song, which is Hellion. This was the second W.A.S.P song I ever heard, and this is what like really hooked me with the band. It's a killer track to me, it always, like, the beginning sounds like literally a swarm of wasps is buzzing through the air at you. Like, it's got that, like, distant kind of sounding, and it's quiet, and it's getting louder as it comes, while Blackie's doing that little bit of a vibrato to his voice. It's such a cool effect. It's ripping, pulse pounding, and it just doesn't let up. The chorus is simple, but it's just awesome. Because it like gradually gains energy, and then like kind of I don't. It's almost like it's gaining like kinetic energy, and then it's like expelling it at the end of each line where he says Hellion. It's such a cool effect. Like, it's all vocally driven while having a really awesome riff. The solo is also the only like really fully fleshed out solo that trades between the leads. This is like a little bit more mature than some of the other tracks on the album as a whole, like musically.
Yes. I totally understand what you're saying. And I've heard Blackie talk about this, and I've mentioned it to you before. So this is, if you have a record or you have an album version of this is side 2. This is the first song on side 2. If you listen to the songs on side 1, where we've had I Want to Be Somebody, Love Machine, The Flame, B.A.D., and School Days, they all have a very distinct style. They're all kind of structured in the blues, where side 2, Hellion, and the songs we're going to get to, Sleeping in the Fire, On Your Knees, Tormentor, and The Torture Never Stops, those songs all have a European style of songwriting. These are two distinct, different sides, and that's really cool about this album. I mean, this is one of my favorite albums of all time, and I really love this album, and I think that's what makes it so cool, because it's so distinct. And Hellion is the leader in all those songs. It's such a different style of song compared to the rest of the album that you've already heard at this point. But again,
for sure. Yeah.
the thing that's attractive to this to W.A.S.P. and to these songs, melodic verses, catchy choruses. I mean, killer riff on this one. And I agree with you. The solo is more complex, more mature, like you said. There's not shredding per se, but there's a little bit more notes in there. They've added. By the time they've got this far into the recording process, I guess Chris or Randy have figured out a little bit more to it. Maybe that might have to do with the fact that it's a European style song, so there's a little bit more complexity in general to the songwriting. And I also heard the same thing that you did, which is the trading off between the two guitar players and their solos. So that was very distinctive as well, where you said, oh, wait a second. So there are two guitar players doing two different solos on here. And that was noticeable, especially on this song.
Oh, absolutely. All right, that takes us to track 7, which is Sleeping in the Fire. Here's the ballad, and it's not bad. It's got, and I would say it's better than not bad. It's, because when a band like this, plays a ballad, sometimes you go, oh, crap. Because you think about the way that Blackie sings, and it's very forceful, very angry, very just high energy. But this really works. It's got a haunting sound. It's a bit softer in the vocals at time, while it's not. He doesn't just withdraw and sing like clean and soft. It's just a little softer, and it really works. It's just funny to me that like a W.A.S.P. ballad still sounds so angry and focused with the vocals. But it's another kick-ass solo. It's a little more soulful, kind of like on the first half of the album, but. And it's still a little more fleshed out as far as like the length. It's a good length solo too. I really like this track.
At this point, when this song came out, we're still 1 year away from Motley Crue releasing Home Sweet Home. So the fact that there's a ballad on this album kind of tells you something about the music scene that they're in, the LA music scene. There's a song you need to play when you're playing live that attracts the chicks, that attracts the women, the females, so that they could, grab onto their boyfriends, or husbands or whatever they are in the audience, and just, start hugging, holding, squeezing, whatever. And these are the kinds of songs. And Home Sweet Home was the biggest one, basically, of the 80s. That and Every Rose Has Its Thorn from Poison. But each of these bands had this kind of song. It's funny because Blackie's not that kind of vocalist. W.A.S.P is not that kind of band. Yet this kind of slow song works for them.
It works for them. Like that's
right, exactly.
That's the thing. They didn't change styles. They didn't pull out the keyboards or anything like that. Like this is still a very W.A.S.P sounding song. Oh yeah, and you say they didn't pull out the keyboards, but oddly enough, they did release a version of the song that was quote unquote acoustic, and I like that version as well too. It's a really cool version. And yes, and the solo's definitely a lot better than anything that's on that we've already heard so far because of the song, and it's because of the fact that it's such a highlight to the song because you're going to hear it. There's not a lot to hide the fact that there's a solo going to happen. So it's a cool song. I mean, lyrically, it's not your typical love song. That's for sure. When you're talking about Lucifer, I don't think a ballad has to be a love song. Even though it's more the musical style of a track, and in that regard, it's not. It's a softer song. It has a romance to it, but it's not your typical. It's not a love song.
No, but the next song is a love song. It's On Your Knees.
Yeah, I didn't know what this song was about at all. Praying, perhaps?
Yeah, I don't think so.
This is exactly like what Steel Panther was parodying all these years later.
You think?
Yeah. It's another good solo, and to me it proves what I always think about this album, that the solos are superior on the second half of the album. It's not a bad track. It's kind of funny to me now. I think at the time it probably had a different vibe to it. Like people probably thought of it differently, but now it's just kind of silly in a way.
Now it's silly. Now, for some people it's offensive. Back in the day, it was just kind of normal.
Yeah.
And it was just one of those things where, the blatant meaning of sex in the song was kind of like, this is what we want. We want you, young lady, to be on your knees, And
oh my God.
I mean, that's really what the song's about. I mean, there's no denying it whatsoever.
No, these guys were very upfront about exactly what they wanted, and I mean, you watch any documentary about hair metal or what is called hair metal now, glam, whatever. You watch any documentary about it, and these guys are like, "That's what it was about," And,
oh yeah.
I mean.
It was about
getting, at this point?
Getting chicks and getting laid, I mean, half these guys, they didn't have jobs, and you saw it. If anybody saw The Dirt, the movie out there about Motley Crue, I mean, they were living in the girlfriend's house because they didn't have a job. They didn't make any money, and the girlfriend supported them. This was the LA scene to a T. Girls supported the bands by letting them live with them. So if the girl had a singer, a bass player, a drummer, or a vocalist, I said that already, or a guitar player as a boyfriend, they were living in their house, rent free, payment free, and they went out there, and the girl was putting the makeup on them, glitzing their hair, and getting them dressed, and offering them some sort of sexual services to get them to have a good performance on stage. And that's just the way it was. That was the LA scene in the early '80s. I mean, what more could a guy ask for back then if you were living in LA on the Sunset Strip? Unfortunately, I didn't live on the Sunset Strip, and I wasn't part of that scene. So I had to live vicariously through W.A.S.P.
I wasn't born yet, so
Sorry.
All right, so that leads us into the 9th track, Tormentor. It starts off with this obnoxious metal sound, like metal mechanical sound that always just really grates on me. So I think it always detracts a little bit from the song. But one thing that I really like about this track is it does have one of the best solos on the album and one of the longest, and there's even a little bit of ZZ Top-ish influence to it. I don't know if that's something that was in mind when the solo was made, but if you listen to it, you can definitely hear that ZZ Top kind of sound to it. It's a cool track. It definitely has that European flair where it's focusing on some kind of subject that like you would hear in a death metal song or even a black metal song where it's focused on, like, this song is about Tormentor, and it's causing torture and that kind of stuff, which is carries over to the next song somehow. But it's decent.
You're right. It's decent. I actually like the next song better. Tormentor is just one of those songs you're at that point where you're getting to the end of the album.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, it's decent. Let's move on to the next track type of feeling.
Yeah, it fits the vibe. It's just there though.
Right.
I don't know if it was written for, because it came out on the Dungeon Master movie, which was in 1984. So I don't know if it was written for that film, which is a distinct possibility, or if they, brought, because members of the band actually appeared in the movie.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so I'm not super familiar with it, but it's an anthology film. If you get a chance, check it out. It's kind of interesting that it's got 3 members of W.A.S.P. I think, or maybe it was all 4. I can't remember. Yeah, actually, all 4 appeared in it. But it's got like Richard Mole. I don't know if you remember him. He was on Night Court.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I kind of remember watching it a long time ago, but anyway, it leads me to believe that the song was written for the movie. So there's always mixed results with that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and then that leads us to the final track of the album, The Torture Never Stops. This is another one that has a very similar structure to I Want to Be Somebody. It's not as good, but it's got a lot of energy. It's a good fitting into the album. I think it ties everything up really nicely, and like the drum track is really good. I do like the bass on here, and it's a good ending.
The torture. I like the chorus on this song.
It's got a good chorus, yeah.
It's got a good chorus. It goes along with the stuff that they've written. Again, it's still in a little more European style. It's definitely one where you've gotten to the end of the album and you're like, okay, cool. They've ended it with a pretty decent song. It's catchy to some degree, and you've basically had yourself an experience with these 10 songs. So I think it's a good song, a good way to end the album. It's definitely not a clunker. So for me, I'm good at this point.
Yeah. So overall, this is a really great album. It's high energy introduction to the band that has some really awesome and memorable tracks. I'm, again, so puzzled by the chemistry of this band, as most of the tracks are penned by Blackie. And he's a bit of a control freak, but a very talented one. So I think, them being kind of in their infancy, that's not as much of an issue as it becomes later when people want more credit, people want more of a say in what the band is doing, etc. And, the album, I think, is even better to me on the reissue. Like I said, I like the sound of the reissue, and I like the additional tracks. They added Show No Mercy at the end, which I think is a better track than a lot of the filler ones that we talked about. Like, I think it's better than Tormentor. I think to me it's better than School Days. I think it's awesome. I wish it was on the original release.
Yeah, I like that. I like that version because it's the B-side to Animal. I think it's pretty good.
Yeah, both of those tracks are really good. Animal, I wish was on the album itself, but I understand. It is kind of cool having that little place in history of what it is and why it wasn't on the album. So in that respect, I get it too. Drummer Tony Richards, like we said, had a really weird experience on this album with Blackie really wanting perfection, and I can't imagine that overbearing situation helped with his personal issues either. So
probably drove him to get high every night.
Exactly.
I can't deal with this.
Yeah, so I just at that point it's just so weird to me that this album came out so well. But I guess you could even say that for I think the famous one that everybody talks about, that the band being in such a weird state and it coming out as a nearly perfect album is Fleetwood Mac with Rumors. It's so weird because everybody was hating each other, and and somehow they put out this album that's just lived through the test of time.
I know.
So, again, like you mentioned before, they would continue on to the next album the next year, Last Command. The only member of the band not continuing on was Tony Richards. And why don't you talk about that?
All right. Well, The Last Command came out November 9th, 1985. So we're talking about, 14, 15 months later. It was produced by Spencer Proffer and released on Capitol Records, and was recorded at the Passion Music House. Now, the Passion Music House was owned by Spencer Proffer. Spencer Proffer is the guy who put together, or produced, Quiet Riot's Mental Health album. So you could tell he's a decent producer. You can tell he has a good eye for stuff, or a good ear, if you want to look at it that way. So he brought in W.A.S.P, and they recorded at the Passion Music House, which was Spencer's studios. Now, the one thing about this album is definitely much slicker production.
For sure.
You can hear it right off the bat. And for the most part, Blackie used that slicker production on the next couple of releases. But it wasn't so slick that it wasn't metal-ish. It wasn't like how when Kiss put out Crazy Nights, how it sounded like Heart, because it had the same producer, Ron Nevison. It just was the keyboards and the pads and all that 80s sound. That wasn't this slickness. The slickness on this album was just that stuff was definitely smoother. You could tell there's a lot more compression on this album. But first song off the bat, Wild Child, one of my favorite W.A.S.P songs, hands down. I love this song. I love the story of this song. I love the melody. It's got such a catchy chorus. The cool thing about this song, that when you watch the video for this song, back from the days when you could watch videos without having to jump on YouTube, or basically now it's actually better because you can actually pull up anything you want right away. Back then you had to kind of wait for it to show up. The video for this song really just kind of enhances the whole story of the song, which I think is pretty cool. So that helps, and this is one of those times where a video and the song kind of they worked hand in hand with each other for the enhancement of the song and itself. So I thought that was pretty good about it. It wasn't just we're going to do this song about wizards and warriors, but the song is it's about two guys about a couple who are in love. The director didn't just take the video and send it somewhere else. These two meshed really well. I like on this song how the solo is. I like the solo. I like how it builds. It's extremely melodic, a little more complex. Now you can see that the songwriting is a little bit more mature, and the guitar playing is a little bit more complex, a little. You could tell that they've grown in the year and a half that they've toured, played all the time, and now coming into this new album. So with the slickly produced album, this song really it catches your eye and your ear right away, and you know you're in for a treat.
Yeah, I mean, it's an awesome track. You can hear that the mix is a little bit different than what appeared on the W.A.S.P, with the drums sounding distinctly different and lower in the mix, though they sound really good. Steve Riley sounds pretty good and fits right in. So he picked up, and from what I understand, even Tony Richards, like I listened to an interview with Tony, and he said, Steve came in and had to learn everything and picked it up really quickly and fit right into the band. So even he praised his successor. The guitar work's really good. Like you said, a little more mature. Chris Holmes definitely has more of an influence here. He has more writing credits, and you can tell. The solo is really cool. It's funny. It's got seagull sounds. It's got jingling bells. It's got maracas and tambourine. I don't know what's going on, why they're adding all these sound effects, but it works and it's really cool. This is one of the better tracks definitely on the album. I really like it.
These are sounds that you only hear in the wild.
The wild tambourine, if you can see it in its natural environment.
Yeah, okay. So, anyway, the song goes into Ball Crusher. Now, let's go back to On Your Knees. This is the opposite. This is the girl getting back at the guy. It's the funny thing about W.A.S.P's first album was that it, other than On Your Knees, there wasn't anything that's really, maybe Love Machine. There wasn't anything that's really blatantly sexual. A lot more innuendo-ish kind of things, like I said, other than On Your Knees. Where Ball Crusher is just like, you're dealing with some chick who's in command, and so, it becomes a typical theme for W.A.S.P, but they get more and more away from the, I guess you could say, the violent part of their band and their act, and more into the sexual part of their act. And that's, you take one for the other. The cool thing about the song, you can hear Randy and Chris trading guitar solos, which is pretty neat. The chorus is catchy. I mean, again, Blackie has a way of writing. He's outstanding when it comes to melodies and catchy hooks. So, it's just another one of those songs. Although, for me, this song probably is one of the more generic songs on the album. And I don't know how you feel about it.
I mean, I like it. It's kind of a little more high energy than the first track, but I'm not saying that it should be before it. I think Wild Child was the perfect opening for the album. It's a little more energetic as a song as a whole. It's pretty typical W.A.S.P affair. The solo is pretty awesome, and it has a bluesiness to it, which kind of carries on through the album. Some more of that ZZ Top sound that I mentioned. The only thing that I think really, and maybe this is why you feel the way you do about it, I think the drums are lacking. It's no slight to Steve Riley as a drummer, because the drum track is good. The problem is it's like too low in the mix for this particular song. It should be more heavy hitting. I mean, the song's called Ball Crusher. It should have drums like hitting hard, and it just sounds almost a little stunted in a way.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I agree with the fact that that's just the way the production is throughout the whole album. It's one of those things where, like you said, Blackie had such a hand in doing the first album, and he made sure that drums kind of sounded in your face, almost like a Lars Ulrich kind of, we're going to make sure
similar
the drums,
concept, yep.
Right, the drums are in your face. Where this one is definitely way, and I don't want to say way back in the mix so much as when you, for those people who don't know, when you use compression as a whole not on the individual instrument, but as a whole for the song, it levels everything out. But at the same time, when you have a song that breathes, okay, certain parts will go up and become louder while other parts get lower. Okay, so when you have a song like, say, for this one, where everything is just kind of, there's not a lot of breathing in the song and there's a lot of stuff going on all at the same time, then the whole thing sounds a little squashed. And so unless you mix something and you punch it way up to the front, everything is going to kind of sound a little flat. And I think that's the issue with this whole album as far as that's concerned, you know, and the slick production. So when you have a little bit less slick production, you're going to have a sound like the first album where things are in your face or certain things stand out a little bit more. So that's production 101 for some people.
Yeah, definitely. I just think, like, because we've heard albums where the bass is, you know, kind of pushed down in the mix, and then there's a track where the bass kind of pops, and it's like, that makes sense. You know, where we've heard a lot of albums that do that kind of thing, and I think in this particular case, like, it was a mistake not to push the drums a little further because of the content of the song, of what it was. Because on the other tracks, that makes sense to me in a lot of ways. Like, as we get the next track, I think the drums fit very well. But, like, in this track, I think it just doesn't make sense.
Right. And speaking of the next track, Fistful of Diamonds is the third track in the album. Starts off with a stock market report. It's either a radio or a TV version of it.
Yeah, what is that?
Well, because it's talking about diamonds, and I don't know.
But
it's just such a weird, you know, it kind of almost like the Pledge of Allegiance there with School Days, you know. And
that makes sense. That's school days, you know. I pledge allegiance to the flag, you know. That's what you do in school. But I don't know. It's not a bad thing. It's just weird.
Yeah. But, you know, the songs, there's a lot of melody on the verses, on the chorus. You know, the solo is melodic, a little bit more complex, you know, than stuff from the first album. Again, we're seeing the maturity and the growth of Randy and Chris on this album, so that's pretty cool. Fistful of Diamonds, I mean, it's a cool chorus, and the drums stand out a little bit more, and I think it has a lot to do because it's not so all the instruments are not on top of each other like they were on Ball Crusher, and so that there's slight room for breath, and that's what, you know, allows it to sound a little bit better.
That's true. There's one thing that I specifically noted about this song: the outro solo is better than the actual solo. What's that?
But it's short, isn't it?
It's short, and but it sounds like it's like, because if you listen to it and you turn the volume up, because, you know, it's fading out. Right. You're like, this kicks ass. Why?
Yeah.
What are they doing?
Yeah, I mean, that's just, I guess that was him just, you know, starting to rip it, and then all of a sudden it's like, I know we're gonna end the song now.
Yeah, exactly. But wait.
Yeah. So it ends, right? So you're cranking the sound because you want to hear this really cool solo, and then all of a sudden you get cowbell. But so here's a perfect example of production and compression. You know, it's a weird thing that we're talking about this in this thing, but this cowbell that you hear, right? It has an echo, it has a reverb to it, but then you hear it stunted, right? And then it kind of echoes, but then it stops. So, and they do it 3 times before it goes into the song. So, you know, it's kind of like, that's a perfect example of the production on this album when you hear that cowbell. But like everything else, we got to have more cowbell. How come there isn't more cowbell?
Jeez.
It's for the most part, though, there's a really cool main riff on this song. It's got again, Blackie's trademark, cool melodic choruses, and you know, Chris and Randy, I don't know who's doing the solo, but it's a pretty cool solo in this song.
From what I understand, Chris did a lot more because he was taking that role, being a little bit more active in that. Randy was a little bit checking out by this time. Like, it wasn't that he wasn't performing well or anything like that. I think he was getting ready to move on. and he left after this album. So from the interviews that I've heard, again, it wasn't that he wasn't putting in full effort or anything like that. He never was really one to like be in the forefront or anything like that.
He was tired of Blackie's shit.
That's very possible, because he actually played with him before in a couple different bands before they formed W.A.S.P.
Yeah, I don't even know those bands. I do remember
Sister and Circus.
Oh, he was in Sister. Okay, that's right. So Randy was in Sister, and that briefly had Nikki Sixx in Sister. Yeah, I remember back in the day when Randy left, and I always wanted to see what his next project was, and I do know he appeared a couple times. He popped up here and there, but never really anything solid, and never anything that was long lasting. So
yep. So one thing about Jack Action that, well, first of all, the name's goofy, but I do like the track. I think it reminds me a lot of game shows from the late 80s and early 90s. The riff does. It reminds me of, like, I don't know, Double Dare kind of thing. If you remember that show. Not specifically the actual song, but shows like that. Like stuff that was on Nickelodeon. And anyway, it reminds me of that. And this was actually one of the few tracks that was co-penned by Steve Riley.
Steve Riley. There's so much to talk about him, but I'm not going to talk about him now. All right. Well, that brings us to Widowmaker. Now, Widowmaker is kind of a weird song in that it's not your typical ballad where it's slow, and it's one of those kinds of things that put you in the mood and you just kind of sway to the song. This is a little bit faster than normal, but you could tell it's definitely one of the ballads because there's two on this album. This is the first one. It's a moody song. Definitely a much more mature song than what we've heard so far from W.A.S.P. But again, true to Blackie, he has a really good knack for making catchy choruses, melodic verses, and Chris is throwing out a melodic solo on this one. Even though it's relatively simple, it's still very melodic.
Yeah, I mean, it has some of the similar haunting vibes to Sleeping in the Fire. You pretty much nailed it on the head with what I was going to say, where this is definitely a ballad, but it's not a very soft one or anything like that, but it still has that ballad aspect to it. This is around the time in a W.A.S.P. album where I'm like, man, I wish Blackie would kind of vary up his vocals a little bit, because it's just the same the whole time. He's just really just very forceful the whole time, and when the album is not like with W.A.S.P, there's a very much more cohesive sound to it. I think they were experimenting a little bit more with The Last Command, and I don't know, this track for me, because there's better ones coming up, but this track for me is like, I don't know, I just wish he would do something a little more like he did maybe a little bit later in his career, where he changes his vocal style up a little bit, because I don't feel like the vocals 100% fit this song.
I know where you're going with that, and that was the weird thing, like with Sleeping in the Fire, he forced his vocals and he forced in that kind of semi-falsetto voice that he was singing in, where...
But I feel like it worked better on that track than on this one.
It did, because for a lot of people, no one knew who they were, and so that was just the whole style. But
yeah,
you could tell throughout this the like, for instance with Wild Child, you could tell he has a different voice. And the one thing though, when you do notice, is that his voice, when it goes normal, it's very deep. So it's not, and it's very similar in regards to like, what's his face? Tom Kiefer from Cinderella. where when Tom Kiefer's singing in his normal, natural tone, it's deeper, it's smoother. Coming Home off of Long Cold Winter is a perfect example of the two styles of vocals that Tom has. The intro, the guitar intro part, he's just singing. He's got straight, clean vocals, and then when he kicks into the rest of the verse, he goes into that high squelching.
Well, I mean, you could say that about Rob Halford, even. I mean,
yeah, but Rob Halford does it all the time, all over the place. But he doesn't have a rasp that is his main voice. He has so many different voices, and that's what's cool about Rob. But they're typically mostly clean. The painkiller type vocal or the into the pit type vocal is something that we know he does, and he forces it, and he does it on purpose because it fits the song. All his vocals fit
I'm just
the
saying
song.
he does a high pitch where he goes, and it is, he changes his tone for that, and then he does the growly kind of voice, and he changes his tone for that, and then he does the kind of whiny pitched, he does, so he does all these different things, effects, but then when you hear his clean voice, it's like, oh wow,
Yeah, but like for Tom,
but he
Kiefer,
uses it effectively,
right? Absolutely, and that's why Rob is who Rob is. But it's like with Tom Kiefer has two. That's it. He either sings in that main rasp, that's kind of like Brian Johnson-ish all the time, or he throws that one little clean stuff that he did in Coming Home, because he never uses that pretty much. And he uses it more now because he needs to protect his vocal cords. Now, talking about Blackie, I think, you can hear it in certain times where his voice goes down and up. You can hear that he's pushing that out, that raspy growl that he has. That sounds like he's singing over a bunch of rocks. That's just the way he sings. He can sing clean, and he obviously has done it later on, and he does a better job of it. He can sing that way if he wanted to, but that's his style. This is the W.A.S.P style, and I agree with you. I think he should use that more often. It would show off the fact that he's a better vocalist, a better musician, whatever you want to call it. Widowmaker, I don't mind it so much. Again, it's catchy, so it's not that bad. But I can see where you're talking about, because because it is such a much more mature song, he could have gone with a mature vocal with it,
or at least just varied the vocal up a little bit.
Right. But then you have a song like "Blind in Texas," the next song on the album. This is one of W.A.S.P's most popular songs. It's probably their most fun song out there. I really, really enjoy this song a lot, especially now that I live in Texas and you hear all these cities that he references during the song. This is a fun song. It's a song about Texas, like I just mentioned. And he talks about how he drinks a lot. It's a cool call and response type chorus. It's got gang vocals in it. I really enjoy the mid-song breakdown where he's talking to the bartender, and the bartender tells him to go back to California on his horse and get the hell out of here. And Blackie's response back is a little belligerent because he's probably drunk. So it's a fun song, but it really nails it as far as it's still a good song out there.
Yeah, it's another one that has that little bit of a ZZ Top flair to it that I keep mentioning, and it's fittingly for Texas. It makes sense. The lyrics are a blast. It's such a fun riff and chorus. The bluesy solos are really great, and we get two of them. So this is totally fitting to be the first single released on the album.
Yes, for sure. Again, it's a fun song, and it's one of their most popular songs. The next song on the album is "Cries in the Night." This is the second ballad on the album. This one is more ballady. This is more relationship-ish.
I think it's way better than Widowmaker.
Yes, it's way better. It's definitely a song where there was a little bit more thought put into the fact that it's a ballad, and so again, it fits the album because there's, gang vocals and it's catchy chorus, but there's that part of it where it's a ballad, and it works. To me, it works really well.
Yeah, I mean, it's not bad. I don't think it's quite as good as Sleeping in the Fire, but I like it a lot. I think it's a good track on the album for sure.
It's not as good as Sleeping in the Fire because contextually, it's a different kind of song. But in the time that it's out, 1985, now you're getting into that range of like you've had Motley Crue do Home Sweet Home. Poison's come out with I Won't Forget You Baby at this point. So it's more, I Won't Forget You is more like this one where it's kind of like the up-tempo ballad. Even though W.A.S.P will never be mistaken for the love song sappy kind of ballad. And W.A.S.P will never be known for that, the Poison style of band. They're just such different bands. But in this particular ballad, I think it works for the album, although it's not as good as Sleeping in the Fire because Sleeping in the Fire works so well with that album. Mm-hmm. And it's just so much. It's a better song in that regards. So this one is just the second ballad on an album that's kind of starting to get towards the end of the album.
Fair enough. Yeah.
So the next song after Cries in the Night is The Last Command. That's the title track. Now things pick up again. The song is up tempo. It's got a cool harmony intro to it. Again, Blackie's on point with the melodic verses and the catchy chorus. I like this song a lot. I like the gang vocal part of it. One thing I like about this song specifically is how in the chorus, there's two parts to the chorus. And the first part of the chorus almost seems like that's all you need for the chorus. And you almost think it's going to end right there. And then he kind of kicks back into the chorus riff and does the second half of the chorus. Different words, but it's really cool how that works, because I almost thought the first time I heard the song, I was like, he says the last command once and it's over with, but no, he goes back into it again and kind of changes things up and says last command earlier or later. I can't remember which one it is, but in one half of the chorus, he says last command at the beginning, and the other half, he says it at the end. I don't know which one goes where, but I like the way that works out on this song.
My opinion is definitely different than yours. I like it. It's just, to me, it was never one that really stood out to me. I always thought it was funny that this was the title track. It makes me think, like, why do bands pick certain tracks as the title track? There are times where it makes complete sense. It's like the best song on the album. There are other times where it's like, yeah, it's a good song. I guess I get why it's, the title track. And then there's I think about it and I'm like, what could be a better title track than The Last Command? Because I don't know how that really makes a whole lot of sense in a lot of ways, because it's like, it sounds so final, even though it's the second album.
Well, it's funny when you look at all the rest of the songs, you're like, okay,
you're gonna name
song
it Jack
could
Action?
be the title track?
You're going to name it Ball Crusher?
Exactly.
Wild Child would have probably been good.
True, but I think the best situation would have been W.A.S.P 2, because there's no song in here that to me stands out enough to sit there and say, oh, this should be the title track.
Yeah.
But they chose Last Command, and that's where we're at all these years later.
True. But anyway, yeah, I mean, it's not a bad track. I think every time I listen to it, I like it. I think I'm going to like it more, but I just continue to kind of like it the same. Because there are really cool moments, like you said, the melodic intro I like. But then I just kind of like start ADHDing after that.
Okay, I see I see how that goes. All right, so the next song is Running Wild in the Streets. this is the point in the album where we're like, we're on W.A.S.P overload, and we're getting there. We just came off a pretty decent song compared to,
definitely, yeah,
the song before Cries in the Night. So you're in the up tempo mode. I mean, it's got some, again, catchy gang vocals in the pre-chorus. The gang vocals in the chorus is good. It's a fun song to sing along with, but it's just one of those songs. This song reminds me a lot of, and it's funny because it says "Wild in the Streets." The song from Bon Jovi's, what you call it? What's the name of that album?
Slippery When Wet.
Slippery When Wet. There's a song, if I'm not saying, he has a song called "Wild in the Streets" too, and it's the same point in the album. It's towards the end. And it's just this thing that kind of gets everybody going again. It's like it's the energy song, and this to me is that same song. It's talking about running wild in the streets and just bringing up the energy again, heading out to the last song on the album. What do you think?
So there's something interesting about this track where this was originally written, or it's written by the producer of the album. What is his name?
Spencer Proffer.
Okay, yeah. So he actually demoed this out to Kick-Axe, or as they were known, also Spectre General. So what's interesting about this is think about it in the context of a Kick-Axe song. To me, that makes more sense because that band played songs that were somewhat similar, like Hunger, that had the same kind of vibe, and I can actually see them. I could not find the Kick-Axe version of the song. I looked under both names. I just could not find it. So I don't know if it's out there, like where somebody's got it, where you can listen to it. But I would like to hear that version to kind of see where they're at. This was also demoed by Black Sabbath, which is kind of interesting because think about where they were at their career at that time. So this was.
I don't see this being a Black Sabbath song.
Well, I mean, think about it as this is post Ian Gillan era of the band. So this would have been Tony Martin or maybe even Ray Gillan. I can kind of see it with the Ray Gillan.
It would have been Ray Gillan because I think Ray Gillan came in and then kind of did his thing and then kind of left.
Yeah. So I in that regard, I think it kind of makes sense. But I also see why they didn't go with it, because what they did on Eternal Idol, which I believe was right around that time, correct me if I'm wrong, but it didn't mesh with this style whatsoever. So
no, this definitely wasn't their style. It just wasn't gonna. That I don't know. You could demo whatever you want, but
yeah, I mean, obviously it didn't make it onto any album or anything.
This was around the Seventh Star.
Which was not even supposed to be a Tony Iommi album. So who knows? I mean, there's a lot of changes going on back then.
And it's got Glenn Hughes on vocals, so that tells you something right there.
Well, but that was a year later, and I'm not sure Glenn Hughes was in the band at this point. I know there was a lot of changes going on because this was right after Born Again. Who knows? Black Sabbath has such an interesting history, but anyway,
right. Well, they were in between vocalists at the time because apparently, if you read the notes on it, Ron Keel was the one who demoed it with Black Sabbath.
Oh, really?
So
interesting.
Yeah, so that's the strange thing there, and that makes sense in terms of vocal pitch.
Of trying to find a place and probably trying to find a new sound.
Yeah, and they were trying to, I guess, be of the times, and so Ray Gillan does come in at this point later on after
a few years later. Yeah,
well, he comes after Glenn, so you can see that Black Sabbath is trying to be relevant. Mm-hmm. So if they were looking at Ron Keel as a vocalist, you could see the kind of style of music that they were trying to go into, and that's not Black Sabbath, and that's why Black Sabbath didn't work very well in the 80s.
No.
But regardless.
But the song does have a cool solo. I'll give it that.
All right. Awesome. I love cool solos. All right. So that brings us to the last song on the album. It's Sex Drive. And yeah, I'm done with the album at this point. It's the last song on the album for a reason. In my opinion, it is probably the least melodic song on the album. It just feels like they just jumbled a bunch of shit together and came up with this song, and they were just done. That's the way I feel.
All right, so interestingly, this is the oldest song that they had in their catalog. This was from the previous band, Sister, and interestingly, the writing credit goes to Blackie and Chris Holmes, which Chris Holmes was not part of Sister. So I listened to both versions. You can find the original, and you can find, obviously, the one that's on the album. So I listened to both versions. Not a whole lot of difference. There is a little bit of instrumentation that's different. The bass is definitely more prevalent on the Sister version. But they pretty much sound the same. The solo's different. It's not a whole lot different, but it's different. So maybe that's where the writing credit to Chris comes in. I'm not 100%
That's interesting.
sure. But yeah, definitely check out the other version after we wrap this up, because I think you'd be interested to hear, both. As I think it's weird. Like I think it's like maybe the producers didn't feel like they had enough tracks, so they were like, hey, we need one more, and they were like, well, let's pull out this old one.
Interesting, because if what you're saying is true, right? Why is Chris Holmes getting a writing credit just for changing a guitar solo? Usually guitar solos are not something that you credit songwriting with, which is interesting, because usually it's basically melody.
There is a little bit different notes. Like the notes are different, but the melody is essentially the same. So
right, and so yeah, usually melody being the same will keep the songwriting the same, and unless you change the vocal structure, sort of like the whole issue with Skid Row and Sebastian Bach.
Yeah,
Skid Row holds they wrote the songs even though Sebastian Bach changed some nuances about the vocal melody.
Big time.
He was looking for he was looking for some songwriting credits, but essentially it's not, the lyrics were written by, Snake and Rachel, and that's it, and the melody, so.
But you gotta listen, if you listen to those old Matt Fallon versions of the tracks, and
they're lame. I mean, his vocal versions are lame.
Yeah, you listen to Sebastian Bach, he definitely elevated those songs, like big time.
And that's a performance issue. That's not a songwriting issue.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Definitely check out both. And let me know what you think, because I'm curious about that.
I'll check it out. So we're at the end of the album. My summation of this album is that I wouldn't call it a sophomore slump so much as it's definitely not the best follow-up, but it was very solid, because you had songs like Blind in Texas, you had songs like Wild Child, so you had stuff that definitely followed up and were good songs by themselves. So that they definitely carried the album.
I just felt like they were trying things a little more, and it kind of deviated from like the cohesiveness of the first album, because that was Blackie's thing. Blackie wrote it and he put everything together. There's not many other writing credits on the first album, whereas this one had more influence from other people, and I think in that regard, like, it was them doing more things, and it's not quite as cohesive.
Right, and I can see that. So, in my opinion, I'm going to go with the first album being the better album. Again, like I said before, it's one of my favorite albums. This is the second one. I recall it distinctly, listening to it a lot. And realistically, I listened to side one a lot, because it had it on a cassette, and I put it in my car and used to listen to it all the time. And, Wild Child, Fistful of Diamonds, Ball Crusher, those songs were just always playing, and so I remember listening to this album a lot, but I also remember listening to the first album a lot, and the first album to me is just so much better. And I like the fact that it's got those two distinctive different styles, so I think that's what really is interesting about that first album for me.
Yeah, I think there are certain aspects about the first album that definitely make it better. I like a lot of the tracks. Hellion, Love Machine, I Want to Be Somebody, Sleeping in the Fire. I think they're all really great tracks. I think what you're talking about, where it has two different styles, is a really cool aspect to it. And then the drums, I think, sound better in the mix than they do on Last Command. And that's no slight to the drummer. It's not what I mean whatsoever. What I'm specifically referring to is the way the mix is done. It is slicker production, and I typically don't like that. I like the rawness.
Production over performance. I mean, there's two different things.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So, and I'm going to agree with you. Despite there being some really good songs on Last Command, I think that W.A.S.P is a better album.
Absolutely. And so one of the things that I wanted to say, and we talked about it a little bit in the previous episode where we were talking about the beef between Chris Holmes and Blackie Lawless. Right after we recorded the episode, I happened to catch a part of the Chris Holmes documentary that's on Amazon Prime. And it's kind of a blown up version of that conversation that Chris had with that interviewer then. And it's more of like a constant thing with Chris. The documentary follows his current life, living out in Cannes, France. He's married to a French woman out there who's madly in love with him. She does everything for him as far as, trying to keep his musical career going. And that's great. He is a very, very rough around the edges American who lives in France, and he makes it known that he's an American who lives in France. He has no intention of learning French, which is part of the arrogance of American people that when they go to another country. But he still continues to gripe about his relationship with Blackie. And it's just like it's the constant theme. And I don't think until something is resolved there, it will ever stop. He talks about Blackie and how, he's one person compared to, another person. And what I mean by that is he talks about how Blackie, the real Blackie, is Stephen Duran, or Duran. I forgot how to pronounce the name. And that Stephen, is a different person. And once he puts his clothes on and he becomes Blackie Lawless and takes the stage, he's a different person. And Blackie Lawless, the W.A.S.P businessman, is different than Stephen Duran, the friend that's outside of the band. And it's a shame in a way, because you can tell that there's something there. And I mentioned this last week without even seeing the documentary, how the two of them are kind of always going to be connected. And it's always going to be one of these things where they really kind of need to put their differences aside, especially now with Blackie being like a what do I call that? A born-again Christian, so it's one of those things where, I think, unless, Blackie is still going to be a hardliner when it comes to business situations, I really think they need to sit down and talk it out, because I think that's really what Chris strives for, is that relationship again with Blackie. And so I hope that comes to fruition one day.
It could be. We may never know, but hopefully we do.
All right, so that brings us now to the Big Four. And the Big Four this week is W.A.S.P songs. Kind of figured that was going to be it, right? So I think
you went. I went first last week. So
you went first last week, so I'm going to go first this week. My Big Four is kind of, I don't want to say all over the place, because it's really not. It's centered around one, I guess, general time period, but it's not what you think it is. So anyway, let's get going. Number 4 for me, the song that started it all was, like they like to say, Animal, I Fuck Like a Beast. If it wasn't included in my Big Four, then I should never do another Big Four. That's just one of those songs that you have to include. Even though there may be better songs out there, that's why it's number 4. It's just one of those songs that you hear it, song structurally, it may not be the best, but it's your typical Blackie, Lawless, W.A.S.P song. It's pretty cool that way. Number 3 for me. Now, here's a different song, and maybe it's because I'm just this kind of guy. It's the song Mean Man. I love that song, Mean Man. I believe it's off of The Headless Children. It's a really cool song. I love the chorus with it because I'm a mean motherfucking man. So I really like this song a lot. It's got a killer riff. So, and Frankie Banali, by the way, plays on that album. Number 2 for me, Love Machine. We talked about it earlier. The tribal rhythm to it, the vocals, just the whole production of it. I really, really, really like this song. And number 1 for me, I kind of mentioned it earlier as well, Wild Child. Hands down, my favorite W.A.S.P song, period.
All right. So it always amuses me how similar some of our lists are because we come from different time periods. We listen to a lot of different stuff, but there are certain times where certain songs are just that good. So my big 4 is very similar to yours, a little different but similar. My number 4 is also Animal, and for pretty much for the same reason. It's just such an impactful song. It is really cool history-wise in metal because of what it is and how it related to the Filthy 15 and all that stuff going on at the time. And so it's just one of those songs that it's kind of important in the history of metal, and also it's just awesome. My number 3 is Wild Child, your number 1. Love this track. It's so good. It's a great opener for the album, and it's the inspiration for Alexi Laio's nickname. I mean, he was Alexi Wild Child Laio, so I always thought that was really cool. He was a huge fan. My number 2 is your number 2, Love Machine. Again, it was the first W.A.S.P song that I ever heard. It really stuck with me. It was one that I've always really liked, and definitely deserving of my number 2. But my number 1, I mentioned it, and you probably remember from earlier, is Hellion. I love this track so much. It is, dynamic. It's heavy. It's really fun. And this is another one that relates to Children of Bottom. They did a cover of it that appeared on their Follow the Reaper album. So if you haven't heard that one, check it out. It's really good. But it is my favorite W.A.S.P track.
It's funny, we were talking about, doing the show tonight and, having to write our notes for it. And I listened to a Spotify playlist throughout the day at work. And when I put it on this morning, if I'm not mistaken, the second song that popped up was the Children of Bottom version of Hellion. So that was
that's funny.
Cool.
Yeah.
So there you have it, guys. That is our big 4 W.A.S.P songs for tonight, and that brings us to the end of this episode. So as a reminder, you can find this and all of our previous episodes on your favorite podcast platform, so please don't forget to click the subscribe button.
That's right. And if you enjoyed what you heard today, be sure to send us a message on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube, or send us an email to debatingmetal@gmail.com. If you use Spotify, be sure to check out our playlist from our greatest hits episodes. And remember to tune into the next episode when we spark up another exciting metal debate. On behalf of Kenneth and myself, stay safe, and remember, always turn it up to 11.
See ya.